It happened at 2 a.m. While the world was sleeping, the America was moving. They called it Operation Absolute Resolve. On paper, it was a law enforcement operation, a surgical strike to capture a man accused of narco-terrorism. But let's be honest with each other. You don't send 150 aircraft, Delta Force operators, and a naval blockade just to arrest one man. You don't risk World War III just for justice. You don't mobilize the full weight of American military power for a drug dealer. When U.S. forces extracted Nicolas Maduro from Caracas and flew him to New York in the dead of night, the media cheered. They talked about democracy. They talked about freedom. They talked about bringing a dictator to justice. But they didn't talk about the assets. They didn't talk about what was really sitting in the vaults of the central bank of Venezuela. And they certainly didn't talk about the digital wallets that only the Venezuelan government had the keys to. The raid on Caracas wasn't an arrest. It was a liquidation. It was a foreclosure. This wasn't about drugs or human rights or any of the noble causes they dressed these operations up in. This was about debt. This was about survival. And if you think this stops at Venezuela, you aren't paying attention. The empire's hungry, and dinner has just been served. What we witnessed on January 3rd was not the end of something. It was the beginning of a new era where sovereignty is conditional, where borders are suggestions, and where the rules we thought governed international relations have been rewritten in a single night. For years, we thought the prize was oil. We were thinking too small. We were trapped in 20th century logic, while the game had already moved into the 21st. On January 4th, just hours after the raid, intelligence reports began to leak that changed everything. Anonymous sources, blockchain analysts on social media, whale watchers in the crypto community, they all started piecing together a picture that the mainstream media refused to acknowledge. Venezuela hasn't just been sitting on oil. They have been sitting on the future of money itself. Since 2018, while the world watched Venezuela's economy collapse under sanctions, something else was happening in the shadows. The regime wasn't just surviving, it was adapting. They were selling oil on the black market, using intermediaries and ghost ships to dodge American surveillance. But here's what nobody realized until now. They weren't converting those sales into dollars or euros or yuan. They were converting them into Bitcoin. Not millions of dollars worth, billions. The estimates that leaked on January 4th suggested that Venezuela had accumulated somewhere around 600,000 Bitcoin. Let that number sink in for a moment. At current prices hovering between $90,000 and $100,000 per coin, that stash is worth roughly $60 billion. Think about the implications of that for just a second. If the U.S. Department of Justice seizes those private keys as proceeds of crime, as assets tied to narco-terrorism and money laundering, the United States government instantly becomes the largest Bitcoin whale on the planet. Larger than BlackRock, larger than MicroStrategy, larger than any nation-state or institution currently holding crypto. They don't just acquire an asset, they corner the market. They control liquidity in the most decentralized currency ever created. They could use it to back the dollar in a new gold standard for the digital age, or they could simply hold it to deny it to their enemies. Either way, the strategic value is incalculable. This was the first crypto war in history, and the United States just won it without most people even realizing the war was being fought. While everyone was focused on the dramatic images of helicopters over Caracas and a perp walk of a deposed president, the real prize was being quietly secured. Digital keys, encrypted wallets, the future of monetary power. Venezuela had accidentally become a major player in the most important financial revolution of our time, and the empire couldn't allow that to stand. The raid wasn't about bringing Maduro to justice, it was about preventing a sanctioned anti-American regime from holding leverage over the future of money. It was about seizing control of an asset that could fundamentally alter the balance of global financial power. And here's where it gets even more interesting. The United States is drowning in debt. $38 trillion and counting. The interest payments alone are becoming unsustainable. Traditional solutions like raising taxes or cutting spending are political suicide. Printing more money accelerates inflation and destroys confidence in the dollar. But what if there was another way? What if you could acquire $60 billion in assets without borrowing, without printing, without taxation? What if you could just take it? That's exactly what happened on January 3rd. The U.S. government potentially seized enough Bitcoin to service its debt payments for months, or to establish a strategic reserve that signals to the world that America is still the dominant force in global finance, even as that finance moves into the digital age. But let's not forget the old god. Before all this talk of crypto and digital assets, there was oil, black gold, the resource that has shaped geopolitics for over a century. And Venezuela sits on the largest proven oil reserves in the world, 300 billion barrels, more than Saudi Arabia, more than Russia, more than anyone. Before the raid, roughly 470,000 barrels of Venezuelan crude left the country every day, and the vast majority of it was going to one place, China. This was more than just a commercial relationship. This was a strategic lifeline for Beijing. China had loaned Venezuela billions of dollars over the years, loans that Maduro's regime had little hope of repaying in cash, so instead they repaid in oil. China needed that heavy crude to fuel its industrial machine, to keep its factories running, to maintain the economic growth that legitimizes Communist Party rule. Venezuela gave China a foothold in the Western Hemisphere, a friendly regime just off the coast of the United States that could provide resources and potentially even military cooperation if tensions with Washington escalated further. With Operation Absolute Resolve, that tap has been turned off. The U.S. Navy now controls the Caribbean ports. American military forces have established a presence that makes it impossible for those tanker ships to operate. China's investments? Gone. Their loans? Defaulted. Their strategic foothold in America's backyard? Eliminated. This wasn't just an attack on Maduro. This was a direct economic strike against China. The United States has effectively seized the collateral on China's bad loans. They have cut off a crucial energy supply line to their primary geopolitical rival. And they have sent a message that resonates far beyond Caracas. We are witnessing the return of resource nationalism on a scale not seen since the colonial era. The difference is that this time it's wrapped in the language of law enforcement and counterterrorism. The United States government is $38 trillion in debt. The dollar's dominance is being challenged. De-dollarization is accelerating across the global south. Traditional allies are quietly diversifying away from U.S. Treasury bonds. The empire is in crisis, and empires in crisis don't politely ask for help. They take what they need to survive. Oil, gold, crypto, land, real, tangible assets that can back currency and power weapons and fuel economies. Paper money is failing, so the empire is going out to seize physical things that have inherent value. The raid on Venezuela accomplished multiple strategic objectives simultaneously. It secured potentially $60 billion in Bitcoin. It seized control of the world's largest oil reserves. It cut off China's energy supply from the Western Hemisphere. And perhaps most importantly, it sent a signal to every other nation in Latin America and beyond. A signal that should terrify anyone paying attention. The message sent to Havana, Managua, and La Paz is chillingly clear. If the United States can storm a capital city in the middle of the night, extract a sitting president, and face minimal international consequences, then no one is safe. If they can treat a sovereign nation like a crime scene, serving warrants instead of declaring war, then the old rules no longer apply. Sovereignty is no longer absolute. It is conditional. And the condition is simple: cooperate with American interests or face the consequences. This is the Monroe Doctrine on steroids, that 19th century policy that declared the Americas were for Americans, meaning the United States would not tolerate European colonization or interference in the Western Hemisphere, has been resurrected and radicalized. We are seeing a terrifying new precedent: the legalization of invasion. The U.S. didn't declare war on Venezuela. They didn't seek UN approval. They didn't build an international coalition. They simply announced they were serving an arrest warrant, and then they invaded. They reframed conquest as law enforcement. They turned regime change into a police operation. Cuba is terrified right now, and they have every reason to be. They're 90 miles from Florida. They've been under U.S. embargo for over 60 years. They have no powerful allies left after the Soviet Union collapsed. If the United States decided tomorrow that Cuba's beaches and ports represent strategic assets needed for national security, what could Havana do to stop them? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Nicaragua is watching in silence because Daniel Ortega knows his country could be next. They have been anti-American for decades. They have resources. They have land. And now they've seen what happens when the empire decides you're more valuable under new management. The other Latin American nations are doing the math right now. Brazil with its vast agricultural lands and freshwater reserves. Bolivia with the world's largest lithium deposits, crucial for battery technology. Chile with its copper, Peru with its silver and gold. They're all realizing that their natural resources are no longer truly their own. These assets have been reclassified in Washington's strategic thinking. They're no longer sovereign properties of independent nations. They're strategic reserves for the United States, waiting to be claimed when the time is right. And it's not just Latin America that should be worried. If you think Venezuela is an isolated incident, look north. Look to the Arctic. At the exact same time the dust was settling in Caracas, at the exact moment when you'd think American attention would be focused on managing the fallout from the most audacious military operation in recent history, Donald Trump turned his eyes to Greenland. He didn't hint at it. He didn't speak diplomatically. He said it plainly, bluntly, with the same casual directness that he used when discussing real estate deals. We need Greenland. Absolutely. Why Greenland? The answer has nothing to do with ice and everything to do with what lies beneath it. Greenland is extraordinarily rich in rare earth elements. These are the minerals that make modern technology possible. They're in your smartphone, your laptop, your electric vehicle. They're crucial for military systems. Right now, China controls roughly 80 to 90% of the global rare earth market. Greenland offers a shortcut to break this monopoly. But here's where things get uncomfortable. Denmark has said clearly that Greenland is not for sale, but Maduro said Venezuelan oil wasn't for sale either. The logic that justified the Venezuela operation can be applied anywhere. If the United States government determines that certain resources are crucial to national security, and if the current government controlling those resources is deemed unwilling or unable to properly manage them in a way that serves American interests, then a justification for intervention can be manufactured. History tells us that empires are most dangerous when they're declining. A rising empire can afford to be patient, but a declining empire grows desperate. The debt crisis in the United States, combined with the rise of peer competitors, has pushed the giant into a corner. And a corner giant doesn't curl up and accept defeat. It strikes out with everything it has. They took the Bitcoin to clear the ledger. They took the oil to fuel the machine. They blocked China to buy themselves time. This video is a warning. We are entering an era where ownership is a myth, where borders are negotiable. If you hold resources that the empire needs, you hold a target on your back. The invasion of Venezuela wasn't the end of the story. It was the opening chapter of a new book, a book written in oil and gold and code. The empire has returned. Not the soft empire of economic integration and cultural influence, the hard empire of military force and resource extraction, and it is collecting its debts. Pay attention to what happened on January 3rd, because this is just the beginning. The giant is awake, the giant is hungry, and the giant is coming to collect what it believes it's owed.